Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a couple questions through you to the proponent.
Please proceed.
First off, going back on the educational purposes, I know we've talked about what that means here, and that would be legislative intent. Is there anywhere in statute that the phrase educational purposes is defined? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Sanchez.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, no.
Representative France.
I think I have some concern over that, how broadly or narrowly that might be interpreted. I think that if we're putting a phrase in there like that, we ought to be defining that in statute. Going back to the line of questioning that Representative Fishbein had concerning this very issue, I think there could be some question as to that, what that means. And then the final thing is that the third change, and I appreciate the majority leader coming in and clarifying some of the points. My concern with the third section, or the change there, of approved by the Board of Education, is it appears by that language the state is then absent an ordinance, which would the local government would decide, would then allow the Board of Education, once the money is put in the non-lapsing account, without any action by the Board of Finance or Finance Committee of a town, the Board of Education can just spend that money. Through you, Mr. Speaker, is that a correct interpretation of that third subsection?
Representative Sanchez.
I'm not sure. Can you, through you, Mr. Speaker, can you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, please, Representative France, please restate your question.
Absolutely. The third phrase, essentially I'm paraphrasing, states that the expenditure must be approved by the local Board of Education. That seems to imply, by enacting in statute, that once the funds at the end of a fiscal year are deposited in the non-lapsing account, that the Board of Education unilaterally, by a vote, can then choose to expend that funds without any oversight of the Board of Finance or the Town Council in a council form of government. Is that correct? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Sanchez.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, it's my understanding that the Board of Finance does not approve what the local Board of Educations do now, presently, with their budget.
Representative France.
And I thank you for that answer, and I would agree with the budget of the current fiscal year. So once the budget is passed and the finances for the Board of Education, for the education of that town in a current fiscal year, that is absolutely correct. But we are now talking about funds from a prior fiscal year that the Board of Ed has no statutory authority to spend. So once the town approves, whether that by referendum or representative town meeting, and the budget approved for the current fiscal year, the Board of Finance does not have any say. It's solely with the discretion of the Board of Education under the oversight of the State Department of Education. However, we're not talking about funds from the current fiscal year. We're talking about funds from a prior fiscal year, and currently boards of education have no authority to spend money from a prior fiscal year. This is expanding the role of the Board of Education as I read it. Is that through you, Mr. Speaker?
Representative Sanchez.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, yes, correct.
Representative France.
Thank you for that. And I have serious concern over that for this fashion. So before I became a legislator, I was the chair of the Finance Committee in my town. So we've had an ordinance in Ledyard for about 15 years dealing with this very issue. And how that happens is it's a non-lapsing, a non-recurring capital account. The Board of Education presents and comes to the Finance Committee and seeks approval for capital expenditures. I think that's the appropriate role, and that's the way the role is now. But by enacting this legislation today, what we are effectively doing is, by state statute, absent an ordinance at the local level, we are saying that the Board of Education has sole authority to spend money outside the fiscal year. That is not their role, that is not the purview, and that is not the current law. And I think that's a great expansion of the Board of Education's responsibility that has effectively no oversight. Because as stated, the boards of education, by act of this body as well as state court decisions, they are political entities of the state under the oversight of the State Department of Education. What I would argue is that the expenditure that's made at the town level effectively has no oversight, say, the Board of Education, until after it's done, and then by then it's too late to have any remedy. We should not be expanding the role of the Board of Education to spend money outside the current fiscal year, and the oversight and the representation of the town is by the Finance Committee or the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen or Town Council in that town. And I object to expanding that role because I believe that the town is not represented well from an oversight perspective to spend money outside of that fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.